This is Up for a Chat with your hosts, Cindy O'Meara and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Cindy O'Meara.
And I'm Kim Morrison, and we are super delighted this week to bring to you an exceptional soul, the amazing Charlie Arnott. Oh my gosh, what a privilege to have you here, Charlie, an award-winning grazier from Burrawa. Gosh, don't know how to say that, being a Kiwi.
Burrawa.
Thank you. An incredible educator and passionate advocate for regenerative farming. Welcome to Up for a Chat.
Cindy, Kim, lovely to be here. Loving your work too, all the wonderful things you girls are doing in the world, and honoured to be on the show.
Well, let's get into it. I know that Cindy's had a boy crush on you for many, many years, but perhaps for the listener who has not ever come across you or maybe even understands you, how would you define or describe Charlie Arnott, and what led you into this amazing work that you're doing?
Well, define myself, not terribly good at that. I guess quite by accident, I think, if I fast forward to now, to describe myself would be, an advocate for regenerative health and lifestyle and food production and farming generally, and environmental sort of stewardship. That's kind of where I've landed, but certainly not by design. I guess just through my love of nature, my love of farming, and probably my sense of curiosity and in some ways probably stupidity. Just experimenting. I'm not saying if you experiment you're stupid, but I've done some really silly things that sort of led me to this point. A lot of those were farming related and food production related, and so I guess that's where I am now. And of my own podcast, Regenerative Journey, and we do education and we teach farmers biodynamics and by running courses on farms. And I guess that's where we are. How I got to be where I am now, and that's a lengthy story, but I'll give you the abridged version. Conventional farmer. Grew up with in a farming family at Burrawa in sort of southwest New South Wales. Very conventional farming, lots of chemical use, lots of input, lots of output, sheep, cattle, crops, hay, all sorts of enterprises, and probably a typical sort of farming business at Burrawa. I went away to school. I didn't necessarily I did study rural science actually. So I was always, I guess, destined to be a farmer. I didn't really think about doing too much else except for maybe being a vet one day. But took over the family farm after being to university and doing a few other things. Ran it in that same vein, very conventionally for a number of years, and then sort of got to a point where I was just not. I was getting a bit sick of waking up every morning and going out and killing stuff. I didn't really think about it in those terms at the time, but when on reflection, that's pretty much my job. Pesticides, herbicides, drenching animals. I wasn't working at all in sync with nature. I didn't consider nature as my business partner. And I just got really curious about alternatives, or I knew I didn't want to be doing that anymore. And I was then started searching for, were there different ways to do things? With soil, with land, with animals, and interestingly enough, with people too. That's a really big part of my regenerative journey, is kind of who I engage with, who I surround myself with, the education and training. And so I took on a lot of training in that field. Started with Resource Consulting Service Australia, did a series of their programs, and have ever since then kind of made a conscious effort to expose myself to all sorts of different, alternative ways of farming. Biodynamics took on a big role in our farming sort of way of doing things early on there. We try, biologicals, a bit of subtle energy sort of stuff, where we try a bit of everything. And by no means are we the best in the world at it. I hazard, I just want to make that clear, where I consider us as a bit of an experiment. We're much bigger, much more than just hobby farmers. We're serious farmers, and we're in the process of really consolidating all our learnings to create a simple model for farming that works with nature at low cost and growing nutritiously dense food. So that's where we are. Again, one of the key, I guess, the things about what we've done, and everyone does in their life, whether it's farming or whatever business they're in, and family relationships, we make a lot of mistakes, and failure is a part of that. And that's where I've done most of my learnings, at the dips in the challenging times and areas of my regenerative journey. So they're not to be shied away from. They're actually part of the growth process.
Charlie, what was the defining moment that turned, like you said that you went to RCS, but there must have been a reason for you to question. Was there a book, a person, a questioning that turned you away from what you were doing, killing everything, to having nature as your partner, and your best business partner? Do you know that where that moment was?
Cindy, there were probably a few moments where were quite defining. One was watching a paddock blow away in the wind one day. I remember the paddock clearly. I know what sheep were in there. I knew what had led to that point that day. We were feeding them grain, and I was, I was a bit upset about watching that dirt, that soil blow away to New Zealand. Is probably where it ended up. Beautiful basalt red soil, and I really, that was like a smack in the face. Going, that's kind of my fault. Like, I put those sheep in there. I got that paddock to that state. That's so-called my soil, or I'm responsible for looking after. That's heading to another country, and that was probably a defining moment. That was definitely, we had there was probably quite a few smaller ones. There was a few pretty tight years there with the millennial drought in the early 2000s. There were trying to I guess balance work and life. That balance, if there's even such a thing. I guess in meeting my wife Angelica, that kind of, which was just after the beginning of my journey, she really enlightened me to organic food, and I'm a farmer who's doing reasonably good things on farm, but my diet was okay, but I wasn't buying organic food. So there was probably a combination of a number of small little nudges in that direction, and then there were a few big slaps in the face, and one of them was watching that paddock blow away. And I guess looking at other farmers doing different things and going, wow, I should be able to do that. I've got, same sort of soil or grass or cattle or whatever. There's something in this. And I think I did get a bit of chemical exposure. I can't put my finger on it. I actually need to take myself off and have a, heavy metals toxicity test at some point. But there were times when I didn't feel very good, and I reckon it was related to the chemical use we were using. So all these things added up to, a move in that right direction. And the interesting thing was, there was always reasons to get away from, but as things developed, there was more and more reason to move towards something. There was a push away from what I was currently doing, and there was an attraction, and there was a draw towards these different alternative farmers, to this different information, to doing things differently, that was really attractive. And I was really curious, and I was like, wow, it feels good, and it sounded and it smelled good. And I love the people that call it regenerative agriculture attracted, wonderful people that I just thought, wow, these people are courageous, and I think I can probably give this a crack as well.
I was listening to a podcast, and it was the nephew of JFK, the ex-president that was assassinated, and he was asked the question, what was his most not defining moment, but what would he say was his best quality? And he said, I'm inquisitive. and you've said that quite a few times, you were questioning, what was happening to your soil, and you are around a bunch of people that are now questioning the narrative of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers and artificial inputs in order to increase yield. So, courage, I really believe now, is defined as questioning what is happening around you. And it sounds like nature was definitely your nudger, as well as your wife. I didn't realize that. So that's wonderful to hear, Charlie, that you had quite a few nudges to move you. And for me, I'm so glad that I met you and what I've learned from you. And one of the things that I happened to be able to do with you for 2 days was the biodynamics course. Can you explain to the listeners what biodynamics is?
Okay. I should be asking you, Cindy, as a student, a graduate of the course. That'd be a great little test, wouldn't it? No, I won't put you through that. So I guess biodynamics is, call it enhanced or advanced organic farming. There's a science or a sort of a substance side to biodynamics, which is, we use a lot of all our products that we use to make different soil preparations or atmospheric preparations are all natural. They're rocks, or they're herbs, they're plants, or they're manures. There are microbes in the manures and so on. So we're working with the biology of we're working with biology. We're working with minerals. We're working with a lot of ingredients you can get off your own farm. And there's, in terms of the substance, that's a pretty scientifically kind of objective way to look at farming. The ingredients, so to speak, that goes into a compost pile or a soil preparation. It's manure and it's basalt and it's eggshell. So we're looking at a sort of all those things come together in various forms to create an enhanced fertility around a composting or a composted kind of a preparation. So there's that sort of substance part of it. And then there's a bit more the spooky wah-wah, which is really about tapping into the cosmos. So, just as the simple way to explain the relationship that we, the plants, the earth, soil, animals have with the cosmos is an example of that is that we're all probably pretty familiar with is the moon. Once a month the moon is full, and also another time of the month it's new. And then these, especially on the full moon, there's lots of things that in our bodies or in the behaviour of animals or different sort of rhythms of the earth. You can see the way the tides are obviously one of the most obvious ones. The moon has an influence on it. And so too, in much more subtle ways, but equally as powerful, are the other planets. And so what we're doing by using biodynamics is opening up essentially pathways for that influence to occur on land. There's so much more. Anywhere, pick a park in a city or a farm. There's so much more going on that we can't see. And yes, there are plants and animals and soil and trees and air and all that sort of stuff. But there's, once we sort of again get a bit curious and maybe do some reading and maybe just sort of have an open mind and maybe meditate or maybe just sitting quietly, one can get the sense of the unseen or subtle energies that exist there. In biodynamics we talk about elementals or nature spirits and they're entities, they're little things that are in nature that are there to help and in fairy tales they're called fairies and gnomes and elves and all sorts of things, and there's other ways to describe them in biodynamics, but they're there to help and I'm a scientist by trade, but I'm pretty open-minded, and I'm really glad that science doesn't have all the answers, because if science had all the answers to everything, then life would be very boring. And I love that there's room for farmers to be creative. There's room for farmers to explore the unseen and the really the true essence of nature, which is there, and there's many layers of them. I'm no expert in all that, by the way. I appreciate it. I kind of do my best to engage with those unseen sort of things. And so back to the question there, Cindy. Rudolf Steiner, just the foundations of biodynamics in 1924, was asked by a group of European farmers to sort of help them, because they had, spent some decades using the NPK kind of theory of fertility and farming, where it was pretty much, your soil's lacking nitrogen, let's find a source of nitrogen and put it on, and phosphorus and potassium and all sorts of things. And that's not how nature works. Nature works as a whole, and the very objective way of thinking, this is missing, I'm going to add it, can have an impact, but not long term. And these farmers were finding that these techniques were failing them after a while. And so Rudolf had a series of lectures in which he kind of laid down the not the rules, but the principles of biodynamics, how people fit into that, how it can help the earth, how it can grow nutritiously dense food, how people can incorporate that into their lives in farming, how they can make them themselves. He went through the steps of making compost preparations and a number of other preparations. And so, what's it done for me? It's given me some framework for healing my landscape, for having a relationship with my landscape. I grew up on our farm. I know every strainer and straining post and tree and gully and whatever, and I know the crimes I've committed in those paddocks over many years of conventional farming, and I say that because I consider those activities when I was a conventional farmer to being quite counterproductive to building a relationship with nature, and so now biodynamics is one of the things we use, and we make preparations and we spray it in our paddocks, which helps to, I consider it like an offering, like it's an offering of love and compassion and asking for a bit of forgiveness. We get out there and we spray. You mix these preparations up in water generally, and you spray them on paddocks, by hand or with a machine, spray units and things. And for me, doing that is a lovely way to kind of re-engage with nature. And as I said, just sort of saying, hey, you know what, I've done some bad things here, years ago, and I'm resolved to help restore that relationship and respect and reverence. And I love the ritual of biodynamics too. We don't go running around on the full moon in the nude with pointy hats on, like lots of people probably think we do. And I'm a bit tempted to try it. But the main things we do is, we make a lot of our own ingredients. We spray it out on our paddocks. There are different times of the year and the month to do that, and it creates a lovely sense of connection with one's landscape. That was probably a longer version than I was intending to, but I hope that kind of gives people a sense of it.
It's certainly powerful. And Charlie, there was a word you said at the very beginning, a couple of words actually. I'm curious about this. Nutritionally dense food is what you like to grow. I happened to have to go to a supermarket the other day, one of my detesting moments, but I had to grab some tissues. And as I walked in, there's an aisle that says health food aisle. And then I questioned, well, if that's the health food aisle, what are all the other aisles? But it kind of drew my attention. And as I walked up that aisle to see what they considered health foods, a lot of it was not resembling ingredients that we would put or use in the kitchen. So when you talk about nutritionally dense food and biodynamics, I'm curious to understand then, if you're one of those farmers, what are the other farmers?
What are they producing?
Yeah, and what's their philosophy if they don't understand this? Or are they of the same mindset of a health food aisle and all the rest? I'm just curious as to where we're going with what we consider nutritionally dense food.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I guess our nutritionally dense food for me is primarily chemical free. So you're not contaminating someone when they're eating it with God knows what. Nutritionally dense, so a tomato can look the same, two tomatoes can look the same, but one can be much more nutritionally dense, and the source of that nutrition is the soil. And so generally, when I was, I'm really cautious and careful not to sort of be critical of conventional farmers, because I was one, and I was, as good or as bad as any. And so, I guess, but when I was in the conventional farming mindset, I was a commodity farmer, so it was more about yield, quantity, not quality. And so as long as I was growing, as many tonnes per hectare as I could of wheat or whatever we're doing, that was our primary motivation and our measure of success. I wasn't considering that I was actually growing food. Yes, I was growing food, of course. Wheat is food, but I wouldn't have made a loaf of bread with the wheat I grew, because there was so much crap on it. It's even worse now. In the last, I'm not sure about Australia, but maybe in the last 10 years, I think probably worldwide, there's been much more of a propensity for farmers to control their harvest period, and they use glyphosate on cereals to desiccate them so they can harvest them when they want to. That's like days before it's harvested, and then it's then consumed some months later by humans. So that's a bit of a horror story right there. So so nutritionally dense food, free of chemical generally, if so. Grown in soil that can actually provide that nutrition, because that's the sense, the quality of a plant, whether it's eaten or not, is dependent on the quality of the soil. That's the source of that health of that plant, and the healthier the plant, the more nutritious for a cow or a sheep or a human, whatever that plant happens to be. So, and of course with animals, we grow beef and lamb. I suggest, that a cow or a sheep that's been eating, nutritiously dense pasture, it can't but be a better quality than something that's just been eating a monocrop like oats the whole, for months at a time, or has a much less diverse profile of nutrients in it, because of the larger, a biodiverse pasture has a large profile of nutrients. That's just the way it is. The more plants that in a pasture that's eaten by these animals, the more nutrients they're getting, and the less gaps there are in their diet. The more they're getting their full complement of nutrients. It's just like humans, isn't it? Like, if we decide to just eat chips and Coke, that's not diverse. And the quality is very poor, and we'll get sick if we don't eat that. And we have a large sort of array of different proteins and carbs and all sorts of yummy different things. Then we're covering our bases, and it's just the same with on a farm. It's really no different. And I love the fact that the human being, and its relationship with its food is just the same as a plant's relationship, an animal's relationship with its food. The source of that nutrients is the soil. The better the soil, the more nutrient dense that food is, and we ultimately, humans, benefit from that, whether we're eating plants or we're eating animals. When those plants and animals have been grown on those farms. So what are the other farmers doing? Well, they're just not thinking about that, and that's fine. I didn't think about it much either for years. It's just a pity that maybe more farmers aren't considering that there might be some alternatives to what they're currently doing, whether it's less chemical, more biological sort of fertilisers. Not being caught up in those chemical loops of production, and selling direct. We sell our lamb direct to consumers via a butcher that we have a really great relationship with. We love the fact that our lamb is going into the kitchens of families, and they know where the food's from. We know it's going to them, and it's at a good valued price too. I mean, that's the thing. I think as you girls know as well as anyone, the world, society is overfed and undernourished, and that's just a fact. And I'm hoping I'm contributing to sort of reversing that.
Wow, I know you are, Charlie. I've listened to your podcast and all the people that you interview, and you're educating people in order to do that. And what I find absolutely fascinating is that farming is very much like nutrition in the human field, in that they weren't looking at quality, and they're still not looking at quality. All they're looking at is yield. So how many calories does that food yield, and can I eat that versus my exercise? That's what I find fascinating. And it was like I started my life as a nutritionist and then became interested in, well, how is my food being grown? And it sounds like you started your life, your life as a farmer on how it's grown, and now your interest in nutrition is obviously there, because otherwise you wouldn't be bothered with, doing what you're doing and creating nutrient-dense foods. And another thing that you have said quite a few times is subtle energy. I've written it down a couple of times now. I have a question about that subtle energy. I was at a organic farmers meetup that I do with a bunch of Sunshine Coast farmers, and they kept talking about some sort of energy, and I don't know if is that what subtle energy is, and where is farming going? Especially, biodynamics is one thing that I know you do, but is that subtle energy something that I don't know about and that you're mentioning? And I know you talked about the sun and the moon and the stars. What is it that's you're talking about when you say subtle energy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the context of how it came up in your gathering the other day, but knowing a few of those who were probably there, then that kind of makes sense that it did come up. So I guess for anyone who wants to get a bit of an understanding, Terry McCosker talks about it in the interview I did with him on I can't remember what episode it was, on the Regenerative Journey. He's a bit of a master of it. He's been doing it for many years. I'm saying this now to sort of set up my answer, and Dr. Patrick McManaway is another wonderful practitioner who is Scottish, but he sort of spends half his time in the States and half in Scotland, and he comes to Australia twice a year and does subtle energy workshops and different levels of. And so what is subtle energy? Well, for me, energy is sort of hard to see anyway. And there's the energy that we're used to. There's the energy in a value of an apple and all those sort of things. And there's kinetic and there's potential and all sorts of different types of energy that we learn in physics at school. But there's also something that, I guess it's a bit like quantum physics in that there's an energy in the landscape that is often residual. Some is you can't see it really. I mean, I think probably some people can see it. Some people are really tuned in, can probably see lines of energy and rings of energy. A lot of them are natural. It's just the way the earth is, and a lot of man-made. You could kind of argue that a human equivalent of subtle energy is like something like EMFs. It's something you can't see, but it has an impact. And they're probably the negative kind of subtle energies. But the positive ones that we can tap into as farmers is if we have the skill, and it doesn't take much skill to acquire, to dowse, to use a pendulum or dowsing rods to tap into the intuition of our own knowing, and ask ourselves questions which we can find the answers of. That's a tool to tap into subtle energy. So you can, via dowsing, it's called, and people find water for bore drilling and things for dowsing. By using that is one of the tools to then ask questions of landscape, finding out where ley lines are. Ley lines are natural lines of energy, and there's also rings of energy that emanate from different spots. And so you're probably familiar with, Stonehenge and other sort of rock structures that seem to sort of pop up in strange places. Not pop up, but they've been there for centuries and centuries. Well, and all the great churches of the world are built on points of energy, because those great churches were built on the ruins of Celtic and sort of indigenous places of, or dare I say, worship or reverence or sort of community, which and we've lost the art essentially to tune into these sort of energies. But back then, centuries ago, millennia ago, everyone's kind of had that sense, called a sixth sense. So subtle energy broadly is the unseen energies in the world that we, if we choose to and can tap into with different methods, utilize positively. We can by putting things like rock structures, like the Celts and so on did at Stonehenge, you can create points of energy that are very powerful, and they things like plants grow better on those areas. Animals love. Sometimes you see animals sort of finding. You'll find animals congregating in spots in paddocks all the time for no apparent reason. Well, probably 9 times out of 10, they're probably sensing subtle energies that are there, and they just love being in those spaces. So my answer is probably not clear, and I'm probably not the one to sort of really step it out, but it's really exciting. I mean, Terry McCosker said it's like the unknown, or the sort of the it's where there's a lot of potential in it in agriculture, because if we can tap into that subtle energy and use it effectively, we can grow better food, and we can treat our landscape in better ways, and we can do quite a bit with it. Again, I'm no expert in it. I appreciate it. I do tap into it, occasionally, and it's something I'm very aware of, and it's a wonderful thing. I don't know if I've explained it very well, and it's probably one of those things that, like, hopefully people have found that, prompted some curiosity to go and explore it some more. And it's not for everyone either. Like, if 20 years ago, I probably would have said it's all bollocks and witchcraft. But, now I've kind of eased my way into, a mindset where I'm actually really open to those things. And I actually love the fact that, as I said, it's not all explainable, and there's so much more there that we can utilise in agriculture via nature that we're not, and we can, and we really should.
Charlie, you brought up something. Cindy encouraged me to read a book many years ago called Mutant Message Down Under. And in there, they talk about the natural dowsing ability, and even that all humans are actually given this ability. But we're not encouraged really to listen to that intuitiveness, even in this day and age. But I remember there was a line, and I might say this wrong, but it was something like footprints have vibrations, and that they tell way more than what is merely seen in the sand. And I'm just curious then, from your perspective, Aboriginal trackers have been known to know exactly when plants and tubes and bulbs shall be, extracted from the ground just by placing their hand or feeling the heat or noticing subtle energy, or I guess that invisibleness. And I'm just, if a land is filled with chemicals and sprays, and it must be incredibly challenging, and why it would be such a disparity and such a significant difference in each of the types of farming. But if you're saying that all the nutrients come from the best soil, regardless of our natural dowsing ability, I'm just wondering, is this a reason why fertility with animals and humans is an issue? Is it the soil that's stopping all the microbiome, or having an impact on the microbiome, not only of our skin, but our gut? What's it doing? If we don't have more farmers like you, how is this going to impact the fertility and understanding exactly what it's going to mean for our future?
Yeah, great question. My understanding and my experience, I guess, given what the changes I've seen, is that as the more chemical we use, the more chemical we use, like herbicides and pesticides and fungicides, the more artificial chemicals we're putting into that. They're artificial, and they're very unnatural. They interfere with the natural function, the natural processes and functions of soil, and they're there to kill stuff. Everything that's got a side at the end of it is there to kill. And once you start, making changes to the balance of, say, the biology in soil by taking out some fungus or killing some of the pest, there's real repercussions for that. So there's an ecological impact of using those chemicals, because they're taking something out, a plant or an animal, out of the system, out of that hierarchy of life, and you will have, the consequences are, generally probably bad, because it's, we're interfering with nature's natural function. There'll be an imbalance, and so you take something out from, there's a hierarchy of pests, say, or insects, and from all the way from a West Illegal down to a worm, somewhere in there. If you take out an insect, then everything above that in the hierarchy will fail because the food supply is reduced, and everything below that insect will thrive and potentially be a plague, so to speak. So, for us to think that we can kind of just play with nature with these artificial chemicals, which are all based on fossil fuels too, by the way. So, we haven't touched on the whole vegan debate about, let's replace all the meat with plants, and how we're going to grow that with, we're going to need a whole lot of fossil fuels burnt to produce a chemical to grow monoculture like that. That's a whole other conversation. But so there's that level of chemical use that interferes with animals and plants. And then there's just the interference in the soil. And once that soil balances out, then it's not, especially fungus. I mean, fungus is one of those things that is probably one of the most important kingdoms on the earth, because it's the memory, and it's the transport system under the ground that takes messages and supplies nutrients to everything else under there, And once you start interfering with that, it's no wonder that the soil's depleted, and if the soil's depleted, the quality of the food is depleted, and then people eating that food are going to get sick. That's the end of the day. They're not getting a full complement of nutrients. They get sick, and that's wonderful. That's a wonderful thing for those who purport to be the ones that have all the answers to make people better with all their pills and things. We know that that's not the way to go. That's not the way we do it. And the consequences, back to your question there, Kim, I'd love to see more farmers trying it, and I guess it starts with, what does it start with? Does it start with pain? Often it is pain that makes people change their mind, and not be financial pain. They might get sick themselves. It might be financial pain. It might be their own sort of personal physical pain. It might be landscape pain. Maybe they're a bit like me. They get sick of seeing paddocks blow away in the wind. So, the more farmers and I don't suggest people go cold turkey and go, let's get rid of conventional and go to regenerative, overnight. For me, it's about, let's transition. People got to be comfortable. They've got to kind of change the paddock between their ears, maybe first, break a few paradigms down before they go and change what happens out in their paddocks on their farm. And, I don't know who's really winning the race, to be honest. I like to think that more farmers are, looking at alternatives to conventional sort of ways of growing food. People aren't going into shops and saying, can I have more, chemical lettuce and stuff sprayed with whatever, in grocery stores. They're going in and saying, I want more of that, that organic corn and the lettuce not sprayed with chemical. That's really positive. That's great at that end of it, the eater's end of it. In terms of the farming situation, I'm sure there are more farmers that, looking to grow things in a more regenerative way. That's fantastic. But there's still a lot of farmers out there that I think could be doing a better job. And it's not for me to say they're bad farmers. It's just like, I'd like to see more, at least look at it. We've got a webinar series that you're involved in, Cindy, coming up. That is a great opportunity for people who are curious about it, farmers or not, to explore the whole world of regenerative ag and soil and plants and visions and goals and animal health and, farm finances and human health. I think, I'd love to see more farmers get to, webinar series like ours.
You've already said that, Dad.
He's my biggest critic.
Charlie, let's tell people about what you're doing, your regenerative journey, and who the speakers are, because if there are people listening, and I know I have lots of farmers that follow the Nutrition Academy because maybe their wives or themselves have started the nutrition program, and they might be really interested. So who are the speakers that are speaking, and what are they speaking on?
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. So Nicole Masters is kicking it all off on the 16th of August, and so she's sort of world-renowned, dare I say, soil scientist. She is all about soil health and how that impacts plants and animals and people. She's amazing. So that's the 16th, and then Katie Zerner is from RCS, who I mentioned earlier on. She's going to talk people through a visions and goals and values sort of process. The idea of all these 7 sort of pillars, I guess they are, Cindy, is for people to understand some foundational principles of regenerative agriculture and regenerative living. It's not just for those who are thinking about, farming this particular way, but I think it's a lot of value to people, to farmers that are already in the process, and they just need a bit of a G up and a bit of a refresher on a lot of these principles. And also, I think it's probably quite interesting for people who aren't farming just to understand the machinations of and the dynamics and the principles of farming, because everyone eats food, and to have an interest in where that food comes from and how it's produced, and the questions to ask of people when they go and buy that food, I think is really important. So Nicole Masters, Katie Zerner, Dr. Shree Gooding, she's a wonderful vet from Billaweather in Queensland. She's going to talk about animal health. Kim Deans is going to talk about, I'm just going to make sure I'm counting my fingers so I remember who talked about. Who did I just mention then? Kim Deans is going to talk on-farm finance, which is a really important part of transitioning, or just any business, of course, keeping tabs on your finances. Stuart Andrews is going to be talking about pasture and grazing management, and probably some decision-making stuff. He's a wonderful holistic management facilitator. Stuart Andrews is going to be talking about landscape function. He's son of Peter Andrews and is one of the pioneers of natural sequence farming, which is all about reinstating the hydrology of a landscape or a farm. And then I think I haven't got my fingers counting here, Cindy, you're going to be talking about human health and the connection between, food and farming and human health and decision-making around that. So I think I've covered everyone. I hope
Katie Zerner? Katie Zerner?
Katie Zerner, yeah. Katie Zerner's doing visions and goals stuff there.
Oh, that's her, okay.
Yeah, that's right. So I think I've got everyone there. And so we're covering soil, human health, environmental health, animal health, visions and goals, and farm finances. I think it's talked about that. Business, like almost business health, isn't it? So, covering it all. The eighth week is actually we've got a few farmers, a few guests that are going to have a bit of a panel session, and they've been through a lot of these processes. They've sort of they've done some work with a number of these different guest speakers, and they're going to sort of talk about their journeys. And then on the 13th of October, we're having a farm day. So we're only selling 50 tickets that include, to the webinar series, that include the farm trip to the farm, and that's down at Burrawa. And on that day, we're going to be having a feast with our lamb and our beef. We'll be doing biodynamic presentations and a bit of demonstrations, some natural sequence farming presentations, and some general farm touring. So very exciting. We haven't had a farm tour at Henry Minow for years, and we're very excited to have 50 or so people there as part of the sort of, I guess it's the conclusion of that webinar series. So all kicks off on the 16th of August.
Oh, sounds wonderful. I'm really looking forward to being a part of it. And another thing that we're doing together is the Festival of Food and Farming at the Changing Habits Farm, which you'll be doing 2 days of biodynamics, which I'm very excited about. We've also got Stuart Andrews, but he'll be doing a workshop, not just online, but he'll be doing a workshop. So mine's not online, yours is online, and I've got just people talking about syntropics, and this is all part of this regenerative journey, and you've been a mainstay in this, and I actually think a founding member of this whole thing, as well as RCS. But you've just been incredible, Charlie. Your podcast is just got the best interviews, and I love how you go to them. You actually go and see where they live and what they're doing and what their regenerative journey is. So I want to thank you for helping people. Like we're just doing a small chat with you now, but there's so much more that I know that you've got there. And I'm going to be really questioning you next time I see you on Subtle Energy. I find it fascinating. What I find fascinating is that again, I'm going to say the same thing as I said before, farming and human health. So farm health and human health is almost on par. People go down the chemical route with farming, they end up on the chemical route with their human health. So they'll use drugs and chemicals and surgeries in order to get well. And sometimes we need them. You know, I'm not saying that if I have to have an animal survive because I've got to get a vet in order to give them an antibiotic because they've got a bad infection, I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to bring that vet in. But I'll often move that animal off my property. I will sell onward rather than keep it there. But we're not going to be cruel. And it's like humans. We're not going to be cruel if you need an operation or you need a medication. Then that's what you do. It's just that I think what's happened is that it's taken hold, that type of chemical farming. And I find it interesting that drug companies are buying up agricultural companies. I find that even more fascinating. It's like they get you sick and then they get you well. Well, they think they get you well with using medications. So how do you see that alignment that it seems to be happening with farm health and soil health and human health?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a pretty clear line of sight. It's referring to, the people are getting sick, and then along comes the farmer community. There's a pretty clear line of sight between that and the business model that exists there, like, sort of literally and also figuratively that, we're as a farming community, and we were very much part of that. We relied very much on the advice of others, and we still do to some extent, but I guess we're a bit more discerning and have different filters. But, we're told, and when I went to uni, we learned a lot about this, the use of chemicals in growing food, and it's necessary, and you can't do it without it, and yada, yada. So, the farmers are used to it. They've grown up with it. It's a crutch. It does make it easier in some ways that, like, I've got the recipe, I'm just going to add this at this time of year. That's going to happen. Now, you don't always get that outcome. Hang on, buddy. You don't always get that outcome because nature comes along and will always sort of give you a bit of a side swipe. But sorry, I'm just distracted with my little boy there. We become so reliant on it, and that's really dangerous, because when we don't get the results that we think that the bottle told us, or the box, or whatever we did, then we're often left without a mind that is willing to explore other things and look at alternatives. And so, it is quite concerning. I don't think you can be a conventional farmer, and I'll tell you, there are some people I know that really struggle. They themselves are pretty fit people. They eat organic food, but they haven't quite worked out, and they haven't been, I won't say courageous enough, but they haven't kind of managed to turn their farms, and run their farms the same way. And that's quite ironic, but because they find it challenging. There's family members involved, and there's family members involved, and there's other considerations. Now, I'm just going to have to plug my computer in before it dies, girls.
While you're putting your computer in, I also see the alternative way of farming, regenerative farming, and the alternative way to health at odds with conventional. And I think that's what when you're talking about that subtle energy, you've got me absolutely intrigued by it. But I just feel that there's no science. It's unseen, and science believes if it can't see it, then it can't be true. But I'm seeing more and more science around the energy. So I'm hoping, that it will catch up with what was probably ancient knowledge, as what Kim was talking about with the Australian Aboriginal people. It was ancient knowledge.
Yeah, I think it would be nice, and I think there's probably a bit of a dig around. I'm sure there's actually a bit more, dare I say, science to it. A lot of the quantum physics stuff is probably once upon a time, it could be explained away as witchcraft, but I think there's more science around it now. And, there's a lot of anecdotal information I think, can't be ignored. But look, I guess a bit like biodynamics, sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but, because subtle energies and biodynamics, for example, don't necessarily abide by the same rules as say, so in a science experiment, you've got different controls and different sort of treatments. Everything stays where it is, but biodynamics has this tendency to kind of creep because it doesn't abide by those rules of science, and so it's quite hard to do a very tight controlled trial of biodynamics. Like literally the stuff spreads, but I would love if there was more numbers around. Actually, there's a woman called Maria Thun, Thun, who I think she was German or Austrian, who spent many years experimenting. She's got some great books, and she was experimenting with the moon cycles and biodynamics, and it's fascinating what she found when planting different vegetables and fruits at different times, depending on the moon and different constellations. And there's no doubt there's a difference. Like literally. There's many photos she's taken of different plants and veggies. There's much more in it than just I think this is doing something, So, but the Indigenous, we have got so much more to learn from Indigenous, not just Australian Indigenous, but anyone around the world. They work that muscle, they work that intuitive muscle. They depended on it. They didn't have technology like we do now, and it was normal. And I think we still have the capacity to, go back to the gym, go back to the subtle energy gym and start working out and start, working that muscle. And it's just a choice, isn't it? It's just like, we're courageous enough to step into that, get a bit curious, maybe go with a few friends, like find some people who are doing similar things and step into it lightly. But it's, we can chat further about that. And as I said, the Terry McCosker interview on the Regenerative Journey and anything that Dr. Patrick McManaway's had stuff to do with is definitely somewhere for people to look.
Yeah, I'll put those names up there for you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that, Cindy.
Yeah.
Charlie, just a very quick question before we come to the close. I appreciate there's lots of potential challenges and limitations for farmers that are thinking of transitioning into more regenerative farming. And so I would dare say, and the reason why we've got you on here is you would be one of the greatest support and resources, not only with your podcast, but with all the education and the information that you have. But as a person who's not a farm girl, and I'll be honest, I don't understand a lot of it at all. I just really appreciate my farmers markets and have a real love and desire to support those beautiful souls. But just out of curiosity, if a farmer was listening to this or a farmer's family was listening and they went, let's do this, what is the length of time it takes from being in a conventional farm to turning that farm into a regenerative, maybe even organic farm? Is it possible, first and foremost, and how long does it take?
Well, it's definitely possible. Look, it's a case-by-case thing. I wouldn't be game to sort of say, start here and in X amount of time you'll be there. It depends on your budget. It depends on your mindset. It depends on the amount of land, what you want to grow, what you got to stop doing, what you got to start doing. As I said, might have mentioned before, the first place is to change the paddock between your ears. It's about having different paradigms and really sincerely wanting to give it a shot. And as I might have also said, to do it slowly. Start with little bits. If you have a farm and you're doing conventionally, then don't go cold turkey. Try a little area, experiment with a little paddock here, or some different treatments for this and that, and start slowly. Maybe don't change your budget even. Just sort of allocate it. Take a bit of money out of what you might allocate to artificial fertilisers and apply that to, like a biological or a biodynamic sort of thing, and just take it very slowly. And it's the time it takes will depend on the size and the budget mainly. But the good news is that you will see progress. Your costs will probably come down because you're not probably buying as much stuff to put on the land. The food you produce will improve without a doubt. But it's not just about removing all the chemicals and not doing anything else. You will I suspect, I suggest strongly that people consider putting something, start composting, whether it's small scale, large scale. Use biodynamics, use biologicals. Look at everything you can get your hands on to explore. It's not like, if I stop doing chemical spraying, it's all going to be fine. There's, you still got to have inputs on a farm, and it's just a matter of how you reallocate what those inputs are. And so there's no silver bullet, and it isn't the silver bullet. Just because you sort of turn your farm into more of a regenerative farm, it doesn't mean you're going to make bazillions more money. There's no guarantee of that. You may well, but it's also important to know that it's still going to depend on your budget and the structure of your business and your discipline and your the systems you have in place. That's really important too. So no clear answer there, Kim, but hopefully might give people some motivation to give it a shot and step into it. And it does require some courage and trust. Absolutely.
And food for thought, excuse the pun.
Yeah, totally.
As we come to a close, we could listen to you all day, and we would love to be in this with you, and your beautiful champion in the background there cheering you on has been a treat. No, it's been a real treat to listen and to hear the love and the love. But Charlie, for people to follow you, they can listen to your amazing podcast, The Regenerative Journey. You've got your webinar series coming up, Explore Regeneration Agriculture. I think that's what it was called, Regenerative Agriculture. We can follow you at charliearnott.com.au. But as a close, your final message to the beautiful Up for a Chat listener, and perhaps a book or a podcast that's having a big impact on you at the moment.
Certainly the podcast. I mean, there's so many great ones out there. Cindy alluded to one. Anything by Robert Bobby Kennedy Jr. Anything that he's on, I'm loving what he's up to right now. Yeah. He wasn't Joe Rogan recently, and that was just mind exploding. Zach Bush is also anyone that's familiar with him or would like to know a lot, sort of, the connection between human health and environment and farming and food. I interviewed him in the previous series. And books I'm reading, actually just a bit of not light reading but wonderful reading is Kings and Grass Castles by Mary Durack. It's just fascinating, the history of pastoralism in Australia and the family, and one of them lived in Burra where we are and nearby Goulburn, and then they went to sort of southwest Queensland and up into the Kimberleys. It's just a reminder of the pioneering spirit of those people, and my God, they had some challenges. We think we did, but we don't have anywhere near the challenges that they had.
No, I agree with you. I love that book. I read that when I was travelling around Australia 20 years ago, and I was up in the Kimberleys, and it was absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah, so you've been up there and seen all of the. Where'd you go up there?
All across the Kimberleys. This is 23 years ago. Charlie.
Oh, you must have been.
So, we went all through the Kimberleys, Kununurra, up through the Mitchell Plateau to the Mitchell Falls.
Wow.
I saw all the chia being grown over to Lake Argyle. Yeah, we saw it all, but I was reading that book, and so I was able to retrace some of the steps that those guys did. And in that book, it was fantastic. Yeah, I agree with you. Fantastic book.
Yeah, it's a good little, I've been reading sort of, self-help, self-development, blah, 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 business motivation. It's like, I just want something it's pretty much an autobiography, isn't it?
Yes.
And relevant, really relevant to Australians, I think. But, hope that answered your question there, Kim. Just a couple of little things there I'm enjoying at the moment.
Well, I absolutely loved it. And you can now, our listener, understand why it was so important for us to have this exquisite soul on Up for a Chat. Charlie Arnott, thank you so much for your time. Cindy and I will continue our boy crush on you, and we want to thank you for being part of the show.
Loved it. I've got the bit of the girl crushes going on now too. So the feeling's mutual, and loved having a chat with you both. It's been a lovely,
Thanks, Charlie.
Lovely time.
Time for a quick break on Up for a Chat to share our favourite products.
One of Charlie's comments today was acknowledging and honouring the paddock between your ears. And something I am super passionate about is supporting people to go on a transformative journey into their own paddock between their own ears and mastering that. So the Essential Self-Mastery Program is a 15-week online journey where you get to achieve personal growth, change mindsets if required, but also enhance your holistic well-being. We use things like neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, the exploration of the 4 temperament personalities, and harnessing the potent properties of pure essential oils. This program offers a comprehensive approach to nurturing the mind, body, skin, and soul. It is led by me. We kick off at the very end of August. If you're interested in being a part of the Essential Self-Mastery online program that is literally transforming lives and the paddock between your ears, then please reach out to kimmorrison.com. That's kimmorrison.com.
We also discussed the Festival of Food and Farming. So I want to give you some information on this. This is the inaugural one that we are doing on the Changing Habits Farm in Reeseville on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. It starts on Wednesday, August the 30th, which is a Wednesday, like I said, to Saturday, September 2nd. What you'll be learning is you'll have Charlie and Hamish for 2 days and learn Introduction to Biodynamics. You will understand as much as you need to do in order to start doing biodynamics either on your farm or on your garden. It doesn't matter what size or scale you are. Then we have Stuart Andrews, which we also spoke about, on natural sequence farming and holding water on the land and managing your land. We will also be doing syntropics with Rob Wyborn, and Brogan O'Meara, my son, will be doing cell grazing, animal husbandry, as well as soil ecology. And we have the most amazing Scott Robinson, who was our first consultant on the farm for 2 years, who will be doing worm farming and composting. So I'm very excited for it. There's only a couple of tickets left. And so if you want to learn more about it, you can just Google actually the Festival of Food and Farming and it should come up, or go to the nutritionacademy.com and look for the Festival of Food and Farming. Look forward to seeing you there.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.